好，我们说全世界呢最危险的2个地方，一个呢第2名就是台海，第一个是谁呢？就是现在乌克兰。好，我们来看到呢，乌克兰其实呢，俄国国防部在2月15号说，他们部分的军力呢在乌克兰边境完成了军演之后，已经是返回了基地了哈。但是呢，普丁就笑说，这媒体应该是要提供攻打乌克兰的细节，没想到还真的有这样的一个细节出来了哈。这个是《太阳报》，如果《太阳报》刚刚劲报15号都说，美国的情报单位呢有一个最新的评估，确认呢攻击的发起日是16号，也就是基辅时间的凌晨3点钟，就是台湾的今天的早上9点钟，今天早上9点钟，但有打起来没有嘛？哈，那还说呢，这俄国呢将会以飞弹跟轰炸机揭开战争的序幕，然后还会登场的是20万大军的攻城略地。所以包含的《太阳报》跟《劲报》都言之做作的说会有这样的战争，而且呢，把这个里面怎么攻击都写得非常的清楚。《每日邮报》呢也揭露说，俄军攻打乌克兰的3条主要的路径全部都写出来了，但是看到俄国的国防部就说，他们的军力在演习完后就返回基地了啊，就这样子啊，怎么会有打起来吗？
他那几个报纸啊，不管是《太阳报》《劲报》还有那个《每日邮报》（Daily Post） 啊，
对，
这几个在这个媒体的定位上面呢，他们都是所谓叫做 tabloid， 就是那种经常没事就会去炒那个明星绯闻，或者搞一些什么外星人啊什么，就他没有什么公信力的，他就是炒作新闻型的。
所以他们可以自己想出这个攻击的一个策略出来。
对，就这几个报纸都是新闻炒作，然后弄很多谣言，然后唯恐天下不乱行的。因为其实，在英美的这个新闻界里面呢，就是被大家视为有公信力的媒体，譬如说《纽约时报》、
对
华盛顿邮报这种，跟这种所谓的 tabloid 这种，就是另外一种类型的娱乐小报呢，他们其实是泾渭分明的。那这几家报纸大概都是属于这种类型，所以它传播谣言基本上就是这个报纸的特性。那确实，事实上他们讲的什么言之凿凿的登陆那个攻击路线啦、时间点啊什么的，当然没有一句会应验啊。
好，但是董哥，我们看到拜登他的反应其实蛮激烈的哈，他认为说现在还是没有办法核实俄罗斯撤回部分的部署在乌克兰东部边境的消息，他认为俄国还是有可能会对乌克兰发动攻击的，他觉得还是有时间会透过外交的手段来解决乌克兰的危机。好，他也说，如果俄罗斯入侵乌克兰的话，华府呢制裁已经准备就绪。好，但是普丁就认为说他根本在胡说八道，觉得他是在乱想的，所以究竟是有可能会，到底他的认为是正确的吗？
其实全世界多数的人都比较相信普丁嘛。因为美国已经腐烂太久了，没有一样是真实的啊。
这个真的很像狼来了，
对啊，
对不对？我觉得美国现在完全就在玩狼来了把戏。你一直说狼要来了，说到第3次大家就不相信了。
因为他讲的没有一样，
因为狼没有来，
有呈现嘛。对。上个礼拜在华府的记者签最有名的一个事件是国务院的发言人跟美联社记者吵架。国务院的发言人他告诉媒体，他开记者会告诉媒体说，俄罗斯已经准备要做那个假的影片，表示俄罗斯被攻击，或者乌克兰东部的那些亲俄罗斯的那些省份很多讲俄语的人也被攻击了，他们会做这样假的影片来做他们出兵的借口。美联社记者就问他说：“你有何证据？”他说：“你难道不相信我，要相信俄国人吗？”没有错。我相信很多人相信俄国人啊，为什么？因为美国已经讲太多次了。那我讲的是上个礼拜、上上礼拜我们在过春节，白宫的发言人沙奇出来讲说现在俄国已经这几天就要打了，迫在眉睫呀。也是跟记者吵架，记者说：“你上个礼拜讲迫在眉睫啊，已经又过了1个礼拜，为什么没有眉睫呢？”
他没有别的形容词了吗？
是他们没有其他东西可以去唬烂了。那现在你看到活脱脱的，其实并没有打嘛。
对。
那现在俄国也表示撤兵，那其实他的原因是什么？因为俄国人已经要到他所要的了。很多人不知道，
要到所要的是什么意思？
乌克兰这次会引起这么大的争论，是因为乌克兰要加入北大西洋公约组织 NATO 嘛？
对。
好，那因为乌克兰跟俄国交界，所以你交界其他的国家，包括美国就可以来乌克兰部署飞弹。那对俄国来讲，这就是兵临城下。你在我家邻居旁边装了飞弹，你不知道对付我吗？所以他认为不可以。那过去呢？过去其实他们有一个默契，这个默契叫做明斯克协议，在白俄罗斯的首都，2014年就签过这样类似的，不是，双方都有签了这个合议。
董哥，我要先跟你中断一下哈，因为我们现在有一个最新的连线，我们要交给若仪，若仪呢要跟乌克兰当地的记者来做连线，把时间交给若仪。好，大家都在关注这俄乌问题哦。今天呢，很特别，在现场呢，我们跟这个 CNN 特派记者 Connor Powell， 他现在人呢是在乌克兰。现在呢，我们在线上要请教他几个问题哦。现在第一个问题，我们先来欢迎这个 Connor Powell。Thank you for joining us, Mr. Connor Powell.
Thank you for having me.
We have several questions. So the first one is, Russia reported today that some militaries are leaving their positions near Ukraine. So is Russia really going to invade Ukraine?
Well, that's very much the question on everyone's mind right now. It's estimated that there are somewhere between 130,000 and 150,000 Russian troops along the Ukrainian border, not only in Russia along the border, but also in neighboring Belarus and also in the Crimea as well. And the U.S. has been saying for several weeks now that the Russians could invade at any moment, that there are enough troops there to launch an attack on Ukraine. In the last 24 hours, Russia has said that they are beginning to withdraw some of those troops from the border, which is seen as a good sign, as a sign maybe of de-escalation. But according to U.S. and NATO officials, they say, we don't know how many troops Russia is withdrawing. We don't know where they're going. And even if they withdraw some troops, there will still be plenty of Russian troops along the Ukrainian border to launch a massive attack into the country. So while Russia's claim that they are withdrawing some troops is seen as a good sign, there is still the concern that Russia has plenty of troops to launch an attack on Ukraine. And really, no one knows what is in the mind of Vladimir Putin. And so there's still a lot of concern here in Ukraine.
So today, Putin have talked to the German president, and then days before, they've talked to the French president. So everyone seems like no one wants a war, right? And people want a peace society. So is diplomacy really possible with Russia, or is there any possible way to reach diplomatic solution?
The signs we've seen the last few weeks was that diplomacy is keeping people talking, it's keeping people engaged. We've seen a flurry of activity from Emmanuel Macron, the French president, coming to both Kyiv and to Moscow. We've seen Chancellor Scholz, the German chancellor, arrive here into the region as well. They're talking, and what we heard from the Kremlin yesterday and heard from the White House yesterday as well, which is that nobody wants a war. So that's a good sign. The problem is there are still this more than 100,000, maybe as many as 150,000 Russian troops on the border. Russia says these are just training exercises, that this mass of troops is not an invasion force. But most people looking at it say this is a bigger force than is needed for a training exercise. So there's still this concern. But as long as world leaders are talking, I think there's a good sense that a war can be averted. But as long as these troops are along the border, there is still going to be this concern. But talks right now, they're a good thing.
And we all know that President Putin has deployed over 150,000 troops to the borders. But President Biden said he doesn't want to deploy any military to Ukraine. So is it because he doesn't want to see what things happened in last year in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I think Afghanistan is a big part of this. In Afghanistan, the Biden administration was criticized for taking a positive view of how long the Afghan government could sustain itself without U.S. support. They said it would last weeks, months, maybe even years. And they were ridiculed, and they were ultimately proven to be wrong as the Afghan government fell very quickly. Most people think that the Biden administration is ramping up the warnings about a possible attack here to combat the worst case scenario. Maybe Russia won't invade here, but if they do, they want everybody to be ready. The White House wants everyone to be ready. The U.S. has moved about 10,000 or so troops into the region, not into Ukraine, but into Poland and a few other places. NATO has 5,000 or 6,000 troops in the region as well, not in Ukraine, but again, in the region. And the concern is if there was an attack, would the U.S. essentially help Ukraine? Ukraine is not a member of NATO, even though it would like to be. And even though there are talks at some point that NATO might allow Ukraine to join, this is the single most important issue for Vladimir Putin and Russians, which is they do not want another Eastern Bloc country, another former Soviet country to join NATO, and they definitely don't want Ukraine to join NATO. Putin sees NATO as part of his world, the Russian world, not as part of Europe. And so this is essentially the security concern that Vladimir Putin wants addressed. Ukraine is not joining NATO anytime soon, but it clearly has deep ties to the West and is moving away from Russia. And that's what Vladimir Putin wants to stop.
And we've read news and see news says that Ukraine and Russia's tension is escalating. But right now you're in Ukraine, right? And I just saw your Twitter. I read your Twitter. You post this hot dog. Looks like delicious. So how's life in Ukraine? Do people still live like normal?
Yes, the hot dogs are delicious. The food here is delicious. The biggest issue right now, from what we're hearing from Ukrainians when we talk to them, is this threat of the Russian invasion. Now, in Ukraine, the government here has not had the same warnings that the United States and other NATO officials have had. They've taken a much softer approach. They've essentially said, yes, Russia is here. Yes, Russia has a large military force on our border. But Ukraine has been fighting a war against Russian-backed separatists in the southeastern part of its country for several years. And Ukrainians will say we've been living with Russian aggression and a possibility of invasion for years now, for decades. So in the country, it is very much an attitude of keep calm and carry on. So life is going on as normal here. There have been rallies. There are drills to prepare for an invasion. But at the same time, schools are open, businesses are open, nightlife is open. And so you have a mixed signal. The Ukrainians are aware of what's going on. They're also living their lives as normal. But at the same time, there's some training and preparations going on in the country as well, if there were to be an invasion.
All right. It's glad to see you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
好，那谢谢若仪哈，就是非常用心的在第一手，我们访问到了 CNN 在乌克兰的记者，告诉我们目前呢在乌克兰最新的情况，看起来这个战事是缓和下来的。那我们真的是很多的网友都说真的超赞的哈，这个给莎莎主播一个赞。那这是我们中天新闻在国际上的国际新闻上面的也是非常的强的哈。